I am Ingrid Nystrom. I'm the manager of Books Inc. Laurel Village, and I'm delighted that all of you joined us this evening. And I know the wine was an enticement, but I know you're all really here to see Claire and Annette. In a world of seemingly unlimited needs and increasingly limited resources, advocacy and policy change evaluation is a welcome addition. In looking at the book's publisher's description, I came across the phrase, "today's turbulent policy landscape." I don't know what he's talking about. Now, I'm not sure when the publisher wrote that, but I can say for certain that it is more true today than it was, even yesterday, or 2 days ago, and that Annette and Claire's book has arrived not a moment too soon. So please welcome Annette and Claire and their fabulous book, Advocacy and Policy Change Evaluation.
So as many as you know, my own life has been very shaped by passion around reproductive health and justice and immigration health. And increasingly, it's been devoted to really thinking about program evaluation and really thinking about evidence and translating research into evidence practices. And in this period of time, this very turbulent period of time that we're living in, really we had to be thinking about how do we increase our effectiveness in terms of our policy struggles and our policy agenda and our policy tactics. And these personal strands of my own research and commitment to translating research into policy really brought to bear this very wonderful creative collaboration with Annette, which has really helped us to be thinking about how do we become even more effective in the tactics and the strategies, and how do we work more effectively with media, with funders, with other individuals. The timing is really uncanny, and we didn't anticipate when we wrote this book that it would be coming during this time when activism is really increasingly part of our daily lives. We appreciate that this is an amazingly trying time when we have to really consider what tactics to pursue, what areas do we focus on. There are so many areas that we have to battle on. And so to be able to stand up for science or to stand up for women's rights or to stand up for environmental justice is just some of the many, many areas that we have to really focus on. And we realize that so many of us have participated in public protests, but are those effective? What will the answer be in the future? Or will it be more important to be thinking about individual testimonies like that of Jimmy Kimmel? Will that make a greater impact? So even with the most inspiring marches, we know that that's not sufficient and that we need to be thinking about how do we mobilize each other. And part of the intent of this book is to be thinking about what strategies are most effective in bringing policy change and how do we evaluate our own effectiveness in this arena. So before I ask Annette to come up and share with you a little bit about the history and what's in the book, I want to say that I'm an optimistic person. And tonight, having this community and sharing and reflecting upon the many years of friendship and family and inspiring moments like today make me optimistic about the fact that we can mobilize and we can work together and we can find effective strategies to be able to move beyond just the sheer exhaustion that has been created for us. So Annette?
We've partnered on a lot of initiatives, including an 8-year evaluation of a policy and advocacy initiative, actually one of the longest-running evaluations here in the state of California to benefit the healthcare safety net. And it's really one of the pillars of our book. So it really did take a village to write this book. Like Pat Walker, talk about an activist. I was so thrilled to read in the Chronicle a couple of weeks ago a whole article by, I can't remember the fellow, a local reporter, and it wasn't that he just mentioned her at the beginning because she's doing some work with ACLU. And then he kept quoting her throughout the whole article, which went on for a few columns, and I thought, wow, this is terrific, where you can really get the sense of activism by talking to the front lines. She's my neighbor and my walking buddy. Anyway, so Also, I just want to acknowledge that our book rests on a really large community of practice. A lot of evaluators, funders, and advocates who've been working really diligently to assess the effectiveness of advocacy and apply it to program planning and development. We were fortunate to be able to build on this because, as you will hear a little bit, it's a very vast body of knowledge, which just needed to be pulled together and moved ahead another step. And at the core of this, and I think Claire really got at this, and what probably a lot of us are feeling right now, is that it is about strengthening democracy. It's about informing decision making and in making sure all voices are heard and are at the table. So that's really the core for us. Like Claire said, I'm the person to tell you what's actually in the book, and it does have a nice cover, but there's a lot more that's going on. But that cover was actually a story in and of itself because we wanted something that spoke to the principles of representation and inclusion and having voice and influence, and what better way than the rainbow and a set of colors. So anyway, the context is this, is that unbeknownst to many of us, or many of you, funders, foundations, and have been really putting a lot of money behind doing more advocacy and policy change work, building advocacy capacity in the nonprofit sector, not just in the U.S., but also internationally, sometimes in the most hard-pressed places. And so they've been wanting to know, well, is their money being well spent? What's working? What's not? And we got on board in the early 2000s. And it's been this really wonderfully kind of tight-knit community of funders, advocates, and evaluators. And it's just, and everybody's been creating. And it finally reached a point where Stanford University Press asked us and others in 2012 to figure out a way to curate this fast growing body of knowledge and write a real book. So I said, hey, anybody can write a book. But being good researchers, because we do hail from the University of California, San Francisco, we ran a survey with the Aspen Institute of evaluators that do this kind of work at a reasonable response rate. We developed 6 case studies of actual evaluations of actual initiatives, and then we reviewed the growing number of tools and kits and measures and metrics and pulled it all into one book. And meanwhile, we are trying to do this crosswalk with this, this large body of scholarship on the political science and public policy. So we actually had a pretty big mandate. Maybe that's why it took 3 years. So anyway, the book has 2 aims, and that is to guide individual evaluators in strengthen their practice, and this is really targeted to people who know what evaluation is. And I know there's some card-carrying evaluators out there somewhere. Chris, yay, woo! I expect a really good question from you. But also we're doing field building, which that's not something one is always asked to do, but, by bringing this information, by providing our best thinking and the cases, we wanted to advance the field to the next level, like more standardized practice, more sharing. So in the book, it does really smack of a lot of evaluation talk. But at the same time, we knew that advocates are evaluating their own work. Funders have their own evaluators. So our audience is actually somewhat broader than just being one niche market of evaluators. And it wasn't the easiest task because I don't know if you've noticed, not only is there a lot of advocacy going on by a lot of different types of activists. I mean, it was already flourishing. I mean, if you talk about healthcare reform, you have a congested environment of advocacy. So this was no narrow little arena to focus on. And, we're lucky. Evaluators are kind of entrepreneurial. They're sort of a scrappy bunch of people who get really creative in really difficult situations. Did I hear somebody laughing? Like, that's true. And that's what we learned in our survey. And I'm not going to ramble through all the findings, but, they are really plying their trade in really difficult situations where there's not enough funding for evaluation, where the advocacy initiative just takes a left turn because somebody dies, there's an election, a piece of policy passes. I mean, it's just a really uncertain and complex environment. And also evaluators are kind of expected to hit the ground running in policy arenas that are dense and dark and difficult. For any of you who are involved with Medicaid policy, you would know what I'm talking about. Our cases were really fantastic, and because it just gave us a real sense of there's so much diversity in the types of advocacy activities that are taking place, and we were really lucky that we could get focus on international, national, and local. We could focus on girls' empowerment, transportation, forest initiatives. So our cases were very rich, but it was really interesting because at the end of the day, evaluators and ways of assessing can be boiled down to some very simple tactics, which are interviews, observations, and just being really aware and understanding of how an initiative is playing out and how to work with those folks. So the good news from our research, our discussions, is that the arena has a solid foundation. That evaluators are really helping advocates speak truth to power, but evaluators are also speaking truth to power, and this is where things can get really tricky because everything's so political, right? You have to really watch yourself and still adhere to the ethics of good evaluation practice. So we developed our findings and our suggestions, and a lot of the book then becomes very technical, where we actually tell folks how do you put rigor into your designs, how do you partner with your stakeholders, and how do you partner all the way through the process, how to communicate, how to really know what's going on in a very dense and complicated policy arena. How do you be more than just somebody that does interviews and observations, and how do you give back? So that's our book. It really is the first of its kind as a book. It's not to say that there aren't other resources, but we're hoping that as a significant investment by Stanford University Press and all of our participants, because we really engaged a community in developing this book, that it will move the field to this place where we have a little more standardized practice, but also we are better able to advise advocates and funders and decision makers. So again, I'll finish up and echo what Claire was saying about, yes, the timing of our book is uncanny. Who knew? So, and really the message is, it's not just that advocates have to up their game to do advocacy. They and their supporters have to know whether it's working or not. It's not enough. We just don't have enough resources, truthfully, to just do a scattershot approach, where we don't know what's happening and whether our message is being heard. And we're here to close that gap. So we're excited about the book's prospects for strengthening evaluation practice and advocacy, providing credible evidence, because we really do adhere to that tenet of we believe in facts. We're good with facts. No, none of these alternative. And we are glad that you're here to help us celebrate the launch of our book. For sure, it's a legacy project. And with that, I'll end and say before we go back to celebrating, are there any questions or comments? I know there's that one lone evaluator out there, and I planted him specifically to.
So, distinguished professors, in this age of hostility against facts and evidence, what is a lonely evaluator to do?
My sense is I think we need to be smarter about understanding our audiences and understanding what kinds of evidence or what kinds of facts or what kinds of arguments are going to be effective with the audiences. And some of these audiences we've never have really had dialogue with. And many of us in our communities at UCSF and other academic centers have never stood up for science or evidence, and unfortunately this is a time where we have to really bring that flag to bear. So I think my answer, and then Annette will add, my sense is that we really need to understand our audience and know how to frame our answers or our evidence in a way that can be useful to them.
And I would just add that something we really try to flesh out is that evaluators have to understand that they are not always just neutral parties providing objective evidence, that they are in a political context, that they do have a position. And in fact, we encourage, a lot of discretion, being very careful, but not to disregard the fact that in all likelihood you are doing advocacy. I mean, your information, you can call it education advocacy. In fact, that's what we get into. We talk about every form of advocacy under the sun, and there's a lot of different types, but that you do things with integrity, you abide by the evaluator's code of conduct, which there is one, but you also have to be aware and sensitive to what's going on.
In terms of a sort of a parallel in charity in Silicon Valley now, there's a big emphasis on effectiveness and giving to effective charities and ones that are efficient. And I'm sort of wondering if there's a parallel now in terms of advocacy, that is there a danger that if you emphasize effectiveness and efficiency in advocacy, that it might drive money and resources only to those organizations or those individuals that have been evaluated as being most effective and take away from maybe the others that are still valuable but not as evaluated as so effective?
Right. So this is true across evaluation in all types of programs, not just this arena of what we call advocacy and policy change. And it's a real tension. And it's it gets summarized with the statement balancing improve versus prove. So improve is to do evaluation and do process evaluation early in an initiative where you can feed that information back into the program to improve it, so by the time you get to the latter years where the program or the initiative is mature, you can then assess for, did it accomplish what it set out to do. So there's that, if you have a program that goes that long. But so this is something that this arena has wrestled with, and in a way what's happened is there's agreement across the field in this area to go with attribution. It's how you look at attribution versus contribution. So we are all happy with if you have enough evidence to show contribution. That attribution or cause and effect is too high a bar, which one could argue is true for a lot of programs. So there's that kind of discussion that you have within the discipline. The last way is you try to apply tools like return on investment analysis, which we did, and that is it's a very resource intensive process. And we were lucky we even had a program that went on long enough with enough data collection to do that. And that's again a point of disagreement. Like, why put that kind of pressure on? But here's the real interesting thing is, evidence has different meanings to different people. And some people who make decisions around funding are swayed or persuaded by a personal testimonial or a story. So are we hearing that? Yeah. So it kind of depends on who you're talking about and what context and what's the policy issue. Great question. Great question. Do we call it a night?
So I just want to say thanks again to everyone for coming, and there's plenty of wine, there's plenty of food on the other side of the store. Wonderful book selections apart from our book. And again, have a wonderful evening, and thanks for coming.